Hi, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us here for our first Policy Action Zoom meeting of 2024. I'm Jeff Garris. I'm the Outreach and Partnerships Director here at the Pennsylvania Policy Center. And starting back, I think back at the start of the school year, we began doing these monthly kind of webinar Zoom meetings where we focus really intensely on a particular policy area where we're concerned or we see an opportunity to make some real progress in Pennsylvania. So we try to focus on a particular one each month, along with some plans for advocacy and action so that folks who want to take action to help achieve a policy victory can do so. So that's the purpose of these meetings. I'm really glad to have you here with us today. We're very excited to be looking ahead in 2024. I have to say with a little bit of fear and trepidation, but also looking ahead in anticipation of some things we have coming up. For those of you who've been around for a while and following state policy issues, you know that the annual budget address is given by the governor, usually on the first Tuesday in February. That is the case this year. Governor Shapiro will be doing that on the first Tuesday in February. When we have a first-term governor, they usually get an extra month to do that. But we're on target for that. So really, when the governor puts forward his proposal of how he would like to see us, invest in Pennsylvania, as well as how we would pay for it in terms of the taxes, that all comes out in this budget address. And after that, then we go into a few weeks of budget hearings in both the House and the Senate in their Appropriations Committee, and then sort of some back and forth over the next few months with the goal of getting this into place by the very end of June, because the state constitution requires that a balanced budget be put into place by July 1st for the next fiscal year. So we are really at the start of this budget year 2024. And we are anticipating that there will be some real interesting opportunities as well as some really important fights. What we want to talk about today and what we really want to focus on is the issue of funding for our public schools and how that can be brought into correct constitutional basically getting us out of the unconstitutional territory where we are right now, funding our schools and really making the kind of investments that our students are going to need to succeed, not just in school, but in life. So we're really excited today to have some experts with us in education policy. We're going to be hearing from two of our friends today. We're going to be hearing from Susan Gobreski, who is with us here at the Penn Policy Center. And also we're going to hear from Susan Spica, who is the Executive Director of Education Voters of Pennsylvania. I'll drop some contact information in there for Education Voters in the chat. And if you have any questions throughout the meeting today, we'll be taking questions throughout if we have opportunities to do so. So you can either type a question in the chat or you can just click the raise hand icon and I'll see that and we'll call on you. We can unmute your line and you can ask the questions directly of either Susan or Susan. And on that note, we'll get started here, kicking off. Really pleased to have with us our friend Susan, the Executive Director of Education Voters of Pennsylvania. Susan?
Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge that in this room is Michael Churchill, who is an attorney with the Public Interest Law Center, who has been deeply engaged in all of this. And so, Michael, if you want to kick in and say anything at any point or correct me, please do, or you can just quietly watch and just be like there. But I want everybody to know that we have like Michael in the room. And so he's been really a huge part of all of this work. So I just wanted to talk right now about the Basic Education Funding Commission, the work they did and the report that they issued on January 11th, which we are hoping will form the foundation of like a new era in how we can see school funding allocated in Pennsylvania in a new way that the legislature and our governor are going to look at funding public education. So I think everybody here probably is really aware that on February 7th of last year, Commonwealth Court issued a decision stating that the current way that Pennsylvania funds public education is unconstitutional. And so this came after A lawsuit was filed in 2014. It went up and down the courts. There was a trial that lasted over 4 months. And, this was an almost 800-page decision that was decisive, that was clear, that stated that, students in Pennsylvania have a constitutional right to education, and that all students, regardless of the wealth of their local community, should have access to a contemporary, effective, oh, Michael, I'm sorry, and another word, public education. So the stakes are very clear here. Governor Shapiro came into office and then had to give his budget address not very long after this Commonwealth Court decision was issued. And so he really didn't have time in his first budget to be able to put together a comprehensive solution that would address the deficiencies in funding for school districts. So, I think everybody saw last year's budget as like a little down payment, and then we've been waiting for the budget address that Jeff is talking about, that Jeff referred to, that will be on February 6th of this year. So in the interim period, the Basic Education Funding Commission, which was formed by legislation, and this commission originally met and came up with the basic education funding formula in 2015, they reconvened. And there were 6 Democrats, 6 Republicans, representing, 3 each from the House and the Senate, and then 3 representatives from Governor Shapiro's administration. So this was a group of 15 people who met on the Basic Education Funding Commission and took their job incredibly seriously. They traveled the state. They held, I think, 13 meetings. They took public testimony from people in the form of people submitting comments. And then they also held hearings where they heard from dozens and dozens and dozens of stakeholders, education funding experts from outside the state, school officials from inside the state, people who work, who are directly impacted. And they really sat down together, and then they worked on a report. And so on February 11th, they voted on 2 reports. There was one report that failed, that was kind of more supported by the Republicans. And then there was a report that actually passed with a vote of 8-7. And that is the report that we're going to talk about. And I can try to put it in the chat here if anybody wants to look at it. It actually is, I would say, something that is fairly accessible to read if you are somebody who likes to read and likes to look at these types of documents on your own. I would recommend that you open this up later, take a look at it, and kind of like try to wrap your head around it. I will say I am not capable of on my own doing an extensive analysis of this to be able to give you every single detail, the ins and the outs, but I can give you an overview of what's in this report. And then I think later on, the PA Schools Work campaign, we were talking today about how we will have somebody present a much more in-depth webinar about this report and what's in it. But I'm going to give you some top lines today. It's a lot. There's a lot of information, but I just want to say that the report that was approved, that is in the chat right here, that was all 3 members of the governor's administration joined 5 Democrats in voting for it. The 1 Democrat who didn't vote for it, Lindsey Williams, said it didn't go far enough and she wanted to see more. And so it wasn't, so I think it was a very principled vote that she made in wanting to see even more in the report. So, it contains really detailed and comprehensive recommendations that, if they are implemented, would bring transformational change to our public school funding system and would really truly have a life-changing impact on public school students, and most specifically the students in the school districts where they have been unable, no matter how hard they try and no matter how much they raise their taxes at the local level, they just can't generate enough funding to be able to give kids the opportunities that they need. It also demonstrates this new recognition in Harrisburg that the state has a constitutional responsibility to provide adequate and equitable funding for public education to meet students' needs. So this is the first time that we've ever seen this in Harrisburg, and I don't think that we should underestimate how monumental it is that we now have a legislature and a governor, at least members of this commission who are in the legislature and our governor who have recognized this. So I'm just going to go through a few top lines that are in here. So the first thing that is, I think, fundamental in the whole report is that it sets an adequacy target for each school district. It uses a calculation that looks at the performance standards in school districts that are successful. And they use the funding formula to calculate like what it would cost for each school district to be able to have the same type of funding that Pennsylvania's most successful school districts have. And so these are adequacy targets that are set for each school district. And they came up with a total of $5.4 billion in state funding that would need to be put into these school districts in order to bring them up to that level. Now, a small portion of that, about 5%, was calculated that it would be needed to be raised at the local level. So there is a small local share component for some of the school districts that are not like raising their taxes enough quite at the local level. But the vast majority of this money, $5.1 billion, would be state funding that would be going into these school districts to be able to bring them all up to a level where they would be able to provide students with all the resources that they need to have successful students. So that means counselors and teachers aides and English language learner teachers. So, during the trial, attorneys and witnesses made very, very clear what their schools, the schools that are in communities that don't have local wealth to fund their schools on their own, what they were missing and what having those resources would mean for students. And so this report basically says, these schools need this funding, and if they have this funding, then they are going to be able to provide students with the resources that they need to be successful. And so I just want to just go back to this idea that these adequacy targets are like monumental. So it's an acknowledgement that the state legislature can no longer just allocate each year whatever they feel like what's convenient, what what people think is politically expedient, but instead it demonstrates an understanding that the General Assembly and the governor have a responsibility to determine and provide funding necessary to meet the district's needs so that they can comply with the requirements of the Education Clause in the Constitution. And so I don't know how much anybody wants to get into real details, but it's a 7-year plan. And each year, there would be an allocation for an equity supplement. There is a tax equity supplement that I'm not going to get into in too much depth, but there is an acknowledgement that there are some school districts that have over the years taxed themselves at a much, much higher burden, higher rate than other communities. And so there's an acknowledgement that there are these school districts that are really, really carrying an incredibly heavy load, and that their property taxes are burdensome, and that needs to be acknowledged, that maybe they meet their adequacy target, but without this incredibly high tax rate at the local level, they wouldn't meet the adequacy target. So there is a small there's a small amount in there that would be an acknowledgement to help mitigate this super, super high tax rate in some of these school districts. And so when we look at this whole package, there's a 7-year plan, and over the 7 years, we would see this investment in schools if this is implemented, and it would create tax fairness, it would create resource equity, and it would kind of straighten out this incredible mess that we have that is Pennsylvania's current school funding system. So I think that, and one other piece that was in here, it recommended $300 million in funding for facilities over each of the next 7 years, which is also an acknowledgement in Harrisburg that, for many, many years, school construction has been funded completely on the local level. And there's finally an acknowledgement in Harrisburg that's just not an okay or sustainable system for schools or for communities. So This report really provides a roadmap for an education funding system that will allow all of Pennsylvania's children to attend a public school that offers opportunities. So it will help them, like, realize their potential and have a bright future. And our very, very sincere hope is that Governor Shapiro will take the first year of this funding that's in the report, and that he will take this and put it in his budget proposal. And then we as advocates can go to Harrisburg and we can advocate for this plan. And that it's not, and we also have to say, 1 year doesn't do it. They stretched this out over 7 years. So we need a commitment from Governor Shapiro and from lawmakers to do this and implement this plan for the next 7 years to get us into constitutional compliance. So there will be more things to come, you know what I mean, and more information about this. But we did a blog post. The Penn Policy Center also did a statement about it, and I think in general terms, this is a great first step, and we are really looking forward to being able to advocate for this. I saw. It's okay if I ask if Robert Walden asked if there were any useful recommendations in the Republican report. I think that there were some that were worth looking at. I think they had 28 different recommendations for like accountability measures, like different ways to invest money that would be good investments. And so I think that looking at the Republican report, you can pick and choose different things out of it that were really useful. I also think the Republican report advocated for school vouchers and school privatization. Clearly, we do not believe that that is a useful or good way to spend money. We all know that there is a very limited amount of funding in the state budget that has to be used to pay for everything that we need. And so if you take a single dollar and use it to pay for a school voucher, that is a dollar that is not available for public education. And so pretty clear that before any money goes into like some of the Republican recommendations, like vouchers, like fully fund the public system, get it in compliance with the Commonwealth Court decision. And then until that happens, there shouldn't be any money for private schools, because the court order is to fund public education, not to fund vouchers for private schools. But I think there are some, it's worth taking a look at the Republican report if you're somebody who's a good reader, and kind of seeing what some of their recommendations are for like the best ways to invest these new dollars.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks for that question, Robert. There's also a related question, which I think you sort of touched on some of this already, Susan. Question, which is, since there's a compromise, it's going to be needed to get this through the legislature. Can you explain how the proposal of the Republican members of the commission differs from the one you're proposing? I think you've touched on some of that, but
yeah, I mean, I think that I think that there is some reluctance in Harrisburg to say that we have adequacy targets that need to be met. There is reluctance to say that we have to like actually have a plan to make sure every school district has the funding they need. And so, I don't think Republicans really want to have an adequacy target for each school district. That's not really going to ever bring us into constitutional compliance. I think they also are very focused on school privatization. So at this moment, I think we're not thinking about like the compromise that we're going to need to make. We're thinking about, in those Republican districts, let's see how this plan will benefit the communities and the schools and the children that these Republican lawmakers are representing. Because in a lot of these Republican districts, their communities would come out on top. They would come out with just, funding that would make a difference for everybody that lives there. So I think that we're going to focus on like trying to make sure that Republicans understand that this plan is good for their communities, and making sure that those communities understand that too, so that they can talk to their Republican lawmakers and say, it's time for you to get on board with this. We are also, many of us are very opposed to having the trade-off be like a brand new voucher program. And, I think that's all that stuff that comes down to June. But for the moment, I think we're going to really focus on just advocating to get the adequacy targets widely acknowledged by the legislature, and then also to just talk about what this would mean for communities all over Pennsylvania.
Great. Thanks, Susan. We're going to be taking more questions throughout the rest of the webinar, but I want to go to my colleague here at Penn Policy Center, Susan Gobreski, who is our senior advisor and has a pretty extensive background in education and a whole lot of other issues too. Susan's joining us while on the road here, so hopefully we'll be able to keep her connected and talk a little bit more about what the opportunities are and why the 2024-25 state budget is such an important place to have this battle over school funding. Susan.
Hello, and naturally the timing is just as I'm on a shuttle to the airport, so I apologize everyone. But I do want to, Susan's done an amazing job and is an incredible advocate. Pennsylvania Policy Center is part of the Pennsylvania Schools Work Campaign. I've been involved with Education Voters and Pennsylvania Policy Center for a long time doing school advocacy, and a shout out to Michael Churchill, who's one of the most amazing leaders in Pennsylvania and has been a champion for this work. So I think that what's really important here is last year was Governor Shapiro's first budget. They had to sort of get it done. The legal decision had just come out. This year is really a critical opportunity. It's one of the reasons that every organization is ramping up to work on this. It's an election year, and what legislators fear the most is not being reelected. And that can work for us. And so what we want to do is we're really focused on making sure that we are elevating these issues both in the press, but also in community level, so that more and more people are asking legislators, what are they doing? Are they supporting this? Have the talking points to talk about it. We really have work to do to make sure that we are engaging the public, the broadest possible public, and taking advantage of the political opportunity to get our schools funded. So this is going to be a huge opportunity, and it's on us. What the legislators are hoping for, the opponents, is that we'll go away, that the energy will just sort of deflate out of this issue because it goes on for so long. And part of our job is to be resilient, and until, as long as our kids need us, we need to be there. And so, we'll be doing the budget analysis at Pennsylvania Policy Center. We'll be working with Pennsylvania Schools Work on strategies for outreach and engagement. What we need are community leaders like yourself, people who are taking time to be there, to take a little bit of time to read ahead, to ask questions, look at EdVoters resources, look at Penn Policy resources. Jeff's been very helpfully putting these in the chat, so that when the action alert comes out, when the signal comes out, the bat signal, that everyone's ready to go and starts moving this. Start writing a letter to the editor now. You don't, so that when the budget address happens, we're able to respond and make sure that we're elevating it. Start bringing it up in your book group and your clubs, telling people that this is one of the things you're going to be watching the most closely. Jeff, if I'm supposed to talk about anything else, go ahead and flag it. If not, I'm going to go on mute, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but we've got people here who are amply able to answer all the questions.
Yes, thanks so much, Susan. Yeah, I dropped in the chat just now a bunch of background resources, as you suggested to folks. The more they can kind of be up on the issues and prepared for when we really get into the heat of the battle here. And frankly, just talking with legislators now about what we want to see and why it's important to make these investments. So you can feel free to use those resources. PA Schools Work has a lot of resources and background information there on the website, which you may find helpful as well. Looking here, I see we have Michael is asking, Commonwealth Communications said today this will lead to $6 billion increase in taxes. Is that true? Susan or Susan?
I wish Mark Steer were here right now because he could explain it better, but that is not true. I think the Commonwealth Foundation is adamantly opposed to having a strong public school system in Pennsylvania because they very much support privatizing public education. And so they're fear mongering about a lot of this right now. And so, I think Mark Steer would say, we've been seeing Pennsylvania's economy grow. And as Pennsylvania's economy grows, we get additional revenues that come into the state. We also have a rainy day fund. We have a lot of money that can be used to fund some of these things effectively right now. And honestly, Susan, you want to go ahead, Susan, you chime in.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's part of what Mark would say. And Mark, by the way, had a minor surgery yesterday. He's fine. He wanted to be here today. But, so the other thing that's really important to recognize is that places with good public schools have good, strong tax bases. One of the biggest issues we have in Pennsylvania is that poorer communities are paying effectively higher tax rates. So if you have to tax $100,000 home to get $4,000, you tax it at 4%. If you have to tax it the same, a $400,000 home to get $4,000, you tax it at 1%, right? And then those same schools. So part of what we're doing is really talking about improving tax fairness, which is another issue that Pennsylvania Policy Center works on. Money is there. It's just a question of priorities. It's a question of who gets the money, right? We've got corporations. There are all types of ways that we can improve tax fairness. And the other thing is that you get what you pay for. So, you know, people like living in communities where the community has the resources to provide the services that people want. And I think that's our message, that our children are worth investing in, that there are ways to do this in ways that don't create an unfair burden. And that we, you know, sort of the old, you know, you can't afford it. Well, you can't afford not to.
Right, because right now there's a massive cost that is being borne by children who are not receiving educational opportunities, right? It's not like somebody isn't paying for this right now, but right now it's these kids in these underfunded school districts that are paying for it, which is what I think Dan from the Public Interest Law Center would say, and always does say. So, you know, people are going to fearmonger, and so I think, you know, they're going to say what they're going to say, but especially when we, and I saw Frida had a question, I think it was someone had a question about how are you going to make sure that this funding doesn't just go to provide property tax relief, which is what I think someone is saying. And so I think that's why in this plan, there is specific money that is designated to create more tax fairness through like some type of property tax supplement that districts that are highly overtaxed would receive, so that the money doesn't end up, the money that should go into classrooms does not end up going to property tax relief. Because we've got both problems. Some communities are very, very heavily overtaxed and they don't have any money to provide students with what they need. And so you don't want those two interests competing. You want them to be able to be separate, so that kids, we know that there will be designated money that is going to children in their classrooms.
Thank you, Susan. And Susan, I'll just note for folks, question was there, or it was raised that, you know, how do you fairly fund schools? We've certainly done a lot of research at Penn Policy Center focusing on the fact that we have a very upside down state tax system in Pennsylvania, and that was supported by a new report that came out last week from our friends at the Institute for Taxation and Economic Policy, who put out a report. They do this about every 2 years nationwide, comparing all the different states by their state and local tax system to try to see, you know, who's paying the most as a percentage of their taxes in each of these states. Well, Pennsylvania is actually, I don't know if we're going to say going down on the list or going up. It depends which way you're looking at the list. But our system is now one of the top 3 or 4 most regressive tax systems in the entire country. That may not be something we can fight directly about, you know, right now for this year's funding for education. But I think it's an important thing we have to remind ourselves, and we frankly have to remind our fellow citizens, our fellow voters, and remind legislators that we are very aware that billionaires in Pennsylvania are not paying anything close to their fair share. And if their name happens to be Jeffrey Yass, Pennsylvania's wealthiest billionaire, who's wealthier than the next 3 or 4 billionaires combined, you take all that extra money you're not paying in taxes and put it into things like, you know, defeating people who are already in elected office, even Republicans who are not strong enough in terms of opposing any taxes for wealthy people, and put a lot of money into to try to push for vouchers. So, you know, we'll never say it's a bad idea here at Penn Policy Center to start making the rich pay their fair share. So those resources are there as well. Let me pause there and see if there are any additional questions for Susan or for any of our friends here today.
And I just wanted to, I'm going to put in the chat again that I think our challenge and our work right now is going to be spreading this word in our own local communities, so that like people who aren't tuned in like we are start to understand this issue. And so we're working on finding a resolution and putting together a resolution with the law centers that people can take to a school board meeting. We've used these in the past and they're super effective. Like I went to my school board and we can draw up a little script for you and you can talk in public, and a lot of times it will make it into the newspaper, and you will inform your school board members and your superintendent about the issue of the lawsuit, about the need for this funding, and about how it would benefit your own school district. And then you make your little speech at the school board meeting, you hand the resolution to your board members, and then perhaps at a future board meeting, they will pick it up and they will debate it and they will pass it. And so that helps engage like a whole different group of people who might not know about the lawsuit in this conversation. So if you're interested in doing that, just fill that in, and there are organizations all over the state that are going to be working on this together, and we'll make sure that we get you in the loop when the resolution's ready.
Great, thanks, Susan. Yes, we have those resources there in the chat. You can see that one for the resolution that Susan was just talking about. Anything folks can do to help educate their neighbors, their friends, their family members, the better. So we do have a question here. Looks, Freda has another question.
I had two. I don't think either was answered, but if I know this isn't about vouchers, but what we're hearing is, oh, it's just going to go to the poorest schools. And what my question was, within a school district like Erie, could people who are above 200% of the poverty level, or whatever the cutoff is supposed to be, could they access the vouchers? That's the one question. And the second is, if we could look at that table B of the chart in the report, I think it's on page 64. And if at least Erie's on page 64, and if you could help me understand the columns, that'd be nice. But those are my questions.
So I will first talk about, and I realize I need to change the form permissions, so I will do that after I'm done talking. I'm sorry that was, we'll figure that out. So first, there is no voucher proposal like that we know of that's specifically on the table right now that is going to be implemented. So I don't want to talk about hypotheticals, but like, in terms of kids being able to access vouchers in a new voucher program, we do have Pennsylvania's Educational Improvement Tax Credit and Opportunity Scholarship Tax Credit Program. $470 million goes into that program every year. That money goes to scholarship organizations that then give the money to private schools, and the private schools basically use it to give financial aid to students who go to those schools. So there is 470 million voucher dollars. There are 470 million voucher dollars already available to students all over the state. Some of it is designated for, quote, low performing schools, but most of it is available to all students. So students in Erie are already taking advantage of the current voucher program in a probably very substantial way. For a new voucher program, we would just have to see what any kind of proposal comes out of Harrisburg that they come up with. So I don't know how to answer the 200% of the poverty limit question.
Well, the people who can access that voucher program, is there any kind of qualification based on income who can get that money? That's
so there's in the current voucher program, the Educational Improvement Tax Credit, Opportunity Scholarship Tax Credit, there is supposed to be an income limit that is about 500%, the federal poverty limit. However, it is not enforced in any way. So some schools probably actually follow that and abide by that rule, but who knows? Who the heck knows who is getting these vouchers and what their family income limits are, because there's no auditing of it or anything like that. So.
Right. The other thing was I can't, if you wanted to look at that table, I don't know if you had time to.
Yeah, so I think that there are three columns. I don't know if I can share my screen, and it's okay. Oh, if you want me to, okay, I don't have it, but I can just tell you that the column that you're looking at is the tax equity supplement, which is the piece we were talking about where there was funding put in for communities that tax themselves above they're in the top third of the highest local burden for taxation. And so that funding in that column would go to school districts to help them relieve the extraordinarily high tax burden that they are bearing in their community. And so that money could be used, I think, to reduce property taxes in column B. No,
it's table B.
Table B, appendix B?
It's on page 64.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yep. So there's appendix B. You know, Frida, do you want to stay on later and I can just talk you through this after this is over? Is that all right? But I can share the screen and we can go through it.
Okay.
That would be good, I think. Anybody else who wants to hang on can do that too, but.
Okay. Thanks, Susan, and thanks for your question, Freda. I don't see any additional questions here in the chat or anyone raising their hand to make a comment. So I think we'll be kind of drawing to a close here now. As Susan said, she's going to stay on here a minute and show Freda a little bit responding to the specific question there related to Erie. Anybody who wants to stick around for that can do so. As we said, we want people to be educating everyone around them, be preparing for when the governor's budget address comes out on February 6th. We'll be putting out a lot of resources and materials in advance of that, and following that, we'll be sure to share that with you. I do want to let folks know about one item here, not directly related to school funding in Pennsylvania, but definitely related to the well-being of children in Pennsylvania. And this is just to give you a heads up that this is going to be coming. But right now in Washington, D.C., after, I'm going to say about 2 years of sort of talking about this and trying to figure out if there was a way to do this, it looks like Congress may, in a bipartisan effort, actually increase the child tax credit, which was expanded and made fully refundable, you'll recall, during the pandemic. It really helped to cut down on hunger in Pennsylvania and across the country. It really made a tremendous difference. And then, it was basically returned back to what it had been. So this is a really important opportunity. We are putting together a sign-on letter that is going to go to Senator Casey and to Senator Fetterman, encouraging them to support this resolution to increase the child tax credit. Now, we're mentioning that because, there will be some things that are going to go along with that as part of a compromise on this. There will be some, reductions to some corporate taxes that had been a part of the 2017 Trump tax law. But on the whole, we're really excited about the potential that this has to improve the lives of children in Pennsylvania and across the country. So keep an eye out. You'll get an email from me the next day or two with information about how you and your organization can sign on to this letter to Senators Casey and Fetterman, encouraging this expanded child tax credit. Again, thanks to Susan and to Susan. Thank you, Susan Spica, for correcting the permissions there. Anybody who tried to click on the link earlier, you should be able to get through there now. So we'll have that resource coming out with a follow-up from this email or from this Zoom meeting as well. Susan Gobreski had to leave to catch her flight already. I will be sure to pass along her thanks from all of you to her when she returns. Again, thank you to our friend Susan Spica for all the tremendous work that she does every day advocating for education and for children in Pennsylvania. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. And thank you to all of you for joining us. We will be back again on the third Thursday in February. You'll get information about that coming up. But again, these calls are the third Thursday of each month at 1 p.m. Have a great day, everybody. Feel free to reach out anytime we can be of help to you. Take care.